Hey everyone, welcome to Beginnings, the show that asks, where do creative people come from? My name is Andy. I'm the host of the show and a writer and performer based in Los Angeles, California, which is currently on fire. Always a cheery beginning to the show when I just casually announce what's happening in the world. Personally, I'm just a ball of anxiety. We took our dog Mabel into the vet for surgery on Tuesday. She had a little breast lump that we wanted to get removed. In case it was, well, you know, lumps ain't good. Not in mashed potatoes, not in humans. So, that's where I've been lately, folks. Not sleeping. Mabel's fine, by the way. She came through the surgery fine. But I don't know how people have children. I don't know how... If I'm this worried about our dog, who came through the surgery fine, she has stitches and little staples. It looks horrific. She's doing okay. But if I'm this worried about a dog, I don't know how you have a kid and let that kid go out in the world and be okay with it. Anyway, enough of that. That's just where my brain is. This is a really good episode. This is Sabrina Ellis. If you don't know who Sabrina is, why don't I read you their bio right now? Originally from Houston, Sabrina has been a mainstay of Austin indie rock for years. In 2008, they formed the indie rock band A Giant Dog, and since then, the band has released 5 albums, including a full-length cover of Arcade Fire's Neon Bible. Sabrina also co-founded the bands Heartbones with Harmar Superstar and also Sweet Spirit. Sweet Spirit have released 3 albums, and their latest, Trinidad, was just released on Merge a few months ago. I think it's just the bee's knees. I say this in the episode with Sabrina, but I've been listening to their album constantly. Constant rotation in the Beckerman-Ekparagan household, at least in my earbuds. Naomi and I do not have the same taste in music. But I just love it so much, and I was really excited to talk to Sabrina, and we get into some real deep stuff. You know, everything from rage issues to gender identity to experimental theater. We cover it all. So I hope you find this fulfilling. I hope you enjoy our talk. By the way, if you are new to the show, welcome. If you'd like to check out more episodes, they're all up on Spotify, or you can download the MP3s at beginnings.libsyn.com. I've been doing the show for over a decade and have done talks with hundreds of musicians and writers and performers, comedians. If you're here because you like music, I mean, I've talked to everyone from Stephen Merritt to Anna Waronker of That Dog, Dean Wareham, Mitski, Ellen Kempner of Palehound, and tons more people from all walks of life. If you like what you hear and you want to subscribe to the show, you can do that on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, Google Play, or whatever it's called now, among a bunch of other places. And I'm on Twitter and Instagram at Andy Beckerman. Coming up, next week, Mac McCon for episode 450. That was exciting. Superchuck might be one of my favorite bands, period. Who else? Owen Pallett from Arcade Fire and Final Fantasy. And, just today I talked to Shirley Collins, who's one of the greatest living folk singers in the UK, I guess anywhere really, but she went on the famed Southern tour with Alan Lomax, where they recorded a bunch of folk songs. So that was an insanely great talk. So stay tuned for that. But for now, let's talk to Sabrina. Do you still have friends from when you were a kid?
I do. I'm not early childhood, but I'm in a band with a few of my high school friends still, and I'm in my 30s.
So wait, how old? Like, how far back does this friendship go?
Age 16 for
Okay,
all of us.
So teens.
So half our lives, more than half our lives.
That's a lot, especially to be in a creative relationship as well as a friendship with people.
Yes.
I think my longest my wife and I do some projects together, but I had a sketch duo with a friend of mine for about a decade, and it started to go downhill. A good 5 years in, 6 years in, and then it eventually fell apart. So I am a little bit curious about, like, you all have grown as people, I assume, in that time. How do you navigate your own changing personalities, especially to go from teenager where you're just like, who am I as a person, into your 30s where kind of like who you are usually starts to solidify? I mean, you could tell me, is that the way it was? Two things. How did you navigate those relationships as it happened? And is that actually what happened to you? Is who you are, the existential part of you, solidifying in your 30s?
Oh, it is. It's solidifying and becoming brittle, just like really quickly. I will say that I think retaining friendships from our adolescence, put into the context of a punk rock scene, caused us all to be pretty slow to grow into ourselves and to mature, because we were kind of running like this Lord of the Flies vibe, a bunch of testosterone and not a lot of rules, and definitely keeping each other in some sort of pecking order. And I think it took us into our early 30s to start to acknowledge each other as these individuals and not just this little pack that needed to act homogeneously. And some of those lessons came from working with older musicians and seeing that they treated each other in more considerate ways and with more patience. And behind our brashness was a lot of love. We knew that we were well-intentioned toward each other, but I know what it probably looked like from the outside was like, those are a bunch of assholes. And then, it's been slow to come, but now, we've somehow gone from being like these Lord of the Flies mentality, kind of chip on our shoulder, punk rock kids who would show people we liked them by being mean to them. Mm-hmm. We've grown into these, empathetic, thoughtful people, and it's been really impressive how seemingly quickly that's happened.
Was there, okay, two more, I mean, this just begets 100 other questions, but the two that popped to mind, was this a kind of, like, when I think about my friends, like in different scenes, there's a certain kind of like orthodoxy that people try to, whatever the orthodoxy is for the punk scene, like you have to be vegan or whatever like that. Yeah. Whatever it is. And it gets enforced. And so I remember like when I was a kid and I had, my peer group, my friends, they like, if I felt ashamed because I liked Fugazi or whatever, right? Because they liked Iron Maiden or something like that. And it felt weird to like something different. Or, I mean, here's a less music example. If they liked a certain movie, I hated it, I just wouldn't say anything because I didn't want them to give me shit for not liking whatever movie the rest of the group seemed to have that there was a consensus about what that movie was. So is that the kind of thing? Is that the kind of orthodox? Is that when you were saying like you all had to be kind of the same?
There were definitely, certain tastes that were shared and other tastes that were not talked about once you were made fun of about it. But also just this kind of protectiveness and defensiveness. And it really took me going through therapy and learning about vulnerability and vulnerability in relation to shame to realize that, wow, that wasn't actually how one has to be. It's maybe not the happiest way to be or the healthiest way to be, to just be tough as nails all the time and not show when others hurt us, or, you know, not show remorse for hurting others, and not stand up for, you know, other people when you hear them being hurt. Trying to be kind of tough. That definitely fits into the punk ethos. But in a way, it also is so funny, like counteractive to the punk ethos too, of wanting to rebel against institutions and stuff. Because, keeping yourself in an orthodoxy, as you're calling it, is a very funny thing to do, and to also call yourself rebellious at the same time.
Yeah, I always it's so funny that no matter what, even you could be in the most anarcho-syndicalist type of group, whatever, and there's still an orthodoxy to that group. I think that's just a dynamic of what groups are. I don't think you can get away with from it. But I think it is interesting that if it's a super enforced orthodoxy, it can somehow stunt your own individual growth.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So that's the other thing I was going to ask was how did you become an individual out of this group then? What was that process? Was it just therapy, like you said?
Therapy was important to this, but some of it was, going through some therapy, making some changes to my own behavior. I had a pretty hair trigger rage issue. And then once I wasn't that person anymore that would react that way, it took a while for people really close to me to forgive that and to give me the benefit of the doubt as oh, you are an individual who's capable of change and growth. And then I think, a lot of my peers are men of my same age. And I think for them to see me showing vulnerability, I think that kind of spread an example that it was okay for us all to do that. But, as one of these things is not like the other, as somebody in the group that wasn't a man, I was definitely going the hardest on trying to be the toughest. I'm not saying I was the toughest, but I was definitely trying hardest to be.
Was it, first of all, you're right in my wheelhouse about rage issues that get dealt with in therapy. But was it a gendered reaction? You're surrounded by men, and you are in some way trying to fit into that kind of gendered orthodoxy, or was it something else? Were you saying you're trying to go the hardest?
Yeah, that's there's definitely kind of a cyclical complexity to gender. If you are a person who works predominantly with people who aren't of your gender, but my gender is actually a non-binary gender. Mm-hmm. So I think, throughout my 20s, there was a lot of confusion in me of okay, I'll never be treated like I'm the same. I'm not one of the guys, but I am also one of the guys, Yeah. I have to be. I run neck and neck with these people. So I think for me, it was constantly doubling over onto myself. Yes, I want to be the hardest in the group. I want to ask for the least consideration and ask for the least privilege in every scenario. I have the vulnerability now to say I deserve my own room sometimes on tour. I've grown.
That's great.
But I used to be don't treat me any different, and I'll show you that I don't need to be treated any different. And I'll do that by having the most crass mouth, by making fun of myself the most, by, being as aggressive as you guys when we're in a group setting, when we are the odd man out as a group. I'm going to be a little bulldog about it. I've outgrown a lot of that behavior, but all of that stuff, I can look back on it and be like, wow, that person was definitely struggling with their gender, identity.
Is that where some of the rage stuff is coming from? That struggle?
Definitely. I mean, rage. Whew. Yeah, if you've been through some therapy for rage, then you know that it comes from a lot of places. For me, it was definitely coming from some like PTSD places. But yeah, when you're having a gender identity crisis or having a situation where your gender is acknowledged differently by your peers and by your society than the way you acknowledge it, it causes, I'd say, like a low boiling rage, like a constant frustration, a simmer. It wasn't the reason for my aggression. I'm not. I think that I had to get some of my rage and aggression kind of out of my constant sightline because it was causing a haze. And then I was able to, very soon after that, I was able to accept the level of frustration I had over gender identity.
I mean, because you're a little younger than me, but we grew up in a world that was essentially binary, and only very recently has culture acknowledged that gender is a spectrum. That has now like basically all the kinds of like axes that you could measure our identities on are a spectrum. And I mean, like, so like you grow up in a world that says you're either this or this, and if you're not, it's just like, well, what the fuck? I don't get it, right? And so I assume that you based on like my very thin, not fitting into certain boxes, my 1% understanding of your experience, you live in this kind of confusion for a good part of your life.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's like, it's a confusion and almost like I think I can admit now that I had a competitiveness with the men around me, and that in some ways I was exhibiting toxic masculinity to try to really prove that I was as much a man as the rest of them. But I wasn't doing it in healthy ways that were healthy toward me or toward them sometimes. I think I helped perpetuate a toxicity in the group. Yeah.
It's also weird to me, like, because I think we talked about this briefly just like a couple minutes ago, though, but like the idea of the like punk ethos, which is against their kind of being like hierarchies and toxic masculinity and all these kinds of things. It was insane to me when I was younger, and I'm like, when I got into indie rock, and I'm like, finally I'm in these groups that are going to believe the same things I believe about like moral things. And then it was the same kind of like, you would find the same kind of like creepy dudes at a Green Day concert that you would find at a Pavement concert or something like that. And I'm just like, wait, but we like this kind of music. I thought we're supposed to be better people. And it's just like, nope, it's all the same kind of dynamics no matter what group you're in. Unless people are being like very, like, even like I'm in DSA now, and it's like, just because we're socialists doesn't mean there aren't like a bunch of creeps hanging around.
Yeah.
So it's kind of, it's like, it's crazy to realize that. It was for me. It was really disorienting for me, I guess I should say.
Yeah. Absolutely.
So, okay. So let's go back a little bit. You grew up in Houston, right?
Yes, I did.
Were you born there?
Yes, I was.
How far back do your parents go in Texas?
My mom was also born in Houston. and so was her mom. My great-grandmother on my mom's side was immigrated from Mexico. And then on my dad's side, nobody was born in Houston. So on my dad's side, I guess his dad comes from East Texas.
Okay.
Depression era, East Texas. But that man was a naval officer. So my dad got to live in some really cool places. Like he spent his middle school years in Spain. So my dad was a white man who could speak Spanish. My dad spent his high school years in Hawaii, surfing and stuff. I was always really jealous about that growing up. My dad's mom is Cajun and Native American, which is an interesting mix from, she's originally from South Carolina. So I have a lot of different blood, different ethnicities mixed. And a lot of my ethnicities are from like cultures that are really have exciting food. So my other job in life, other than being a musician, is that I've been a cook up until 2016 when I was touring I've been touring full time since then. Cooking is another thing that I feel is a texture that I was just kind of born with.
Yeah. Any specific kind of cuisine?
Yeah, Mexican, Cajun, and then also just really having an appreciation for seafood, things that come from the ocean. I feel like I just understand those proteins the most. And then I, in my early 20s, started cooking in professional kitchens, and that's more of an athletic practice than anything. It's like a rhythm. It's like playing drums or something, I think, cooking on a line.
Yeah. Okay, I was going to ask this. It's a dumb question, but I'll ask it anyway. Do you find that there are other kinds of connections between making music and cooking besides the rhythm part of it?
I mean, it's mostly, the rhythm and the timing. But also I think, the hand and mind connection, wanting to use your hands to express yourself. I feel that as a cook. I still have this habit of touching my food with my hands. Like, I'll do everything properly if I'm making food for people, but then when we sit down to eat, I'll start eating with my hands because of the habit for about a decade of working in a kitchen. And you get a break to eat and you just kind of go off in a corner and start eating your food with your hands, and you don't care what temperature it is. So yeah, that's something definitely, I think, when playing music, there's definitely a hand and mind connection. Your tactile senses and your creativity and your lyrical sensibilities. Also, I think that for a songwriter, doing something distracting, like tuning out of your brain, that's sometimes when I get some good ideas. So I can remember being in the kitchen and being like lost in the rhythm of, having 20 tickets on the line and very little time to think, and then just getting fixated on an idea. And then being like, I have to remember this idea.
There's also, I mean, you tell me if this is true, but like, I'm imagining that there's also this kind of pressure, like you can't fuck up. You can't fuck up someone's food. You can't,
Right.
in the same way that like, I mean, look, you can fuck up on stage. Like there's not, you can always start a song over if like something really goes bad. But, but like usually, there's a pressure like, oh, I don't want to screw up. I don't want to make a mistake. It's the same kind of like pressure, or they're analogical.
Yeah, I think you're right about that. I think, there is an excitement to the pressure of a kitchen. There's an excitement to the pressure of a stage. And I'm finding in these COVID times that pressure was kind of a goddess of mine, a religion, a muse. Like I'm really having trouble even organizing my physical and mental energy right now without assignments and obligations and deadlines and
Yep,
appropriate outlets.
100%. I get
You're
that.
having that?
Oh yeah. Oh yeah, it's very much like it's even Naomi calls it quar brain or Q brain. Like I find it difficult to even like I find myself like I go to sit down and do a certain task, and then it just goes out of my head. It's like it's like a constant feeling of going to the fridge for something, and you open the fridge door, and then you're like, wait, what was I gonna get? But it's this kind of like haze that you're living in quarantine. Like we used to do a live comedy show here, and now we've been doing it online on Wednesdays at 2:00. And
I want to see it.
Tune in today, twitch.tv/couples therapy pod. But I had to look up. We have like a little header at the top that says like how many days in quarantine it's been. I had to look it up. 91 days. It's been 91 days. If you started on that Friday right after, I think Wednesday the 9th. No, Wednesday the 11th is when everything kind of like started to shut down and people started to take it seriously. So 3 months in mostly isolation is mind-numbing.
Yeah. I've been through some extremes with that. Yeah, mind-numbing and like I have OCD and it manifests as hypochondria, which I really hate talking about hypochondria because it's such a pop culture reference for like, let's make fun of this type of person that we don't really understand what it's like to be. Being a person that truly believes I'm terminally ill frequently is like, actually, if I could change one thing about myself, well, I would like thicker eyebrows that are darker, but I would also love to not like wake up genuinely believing that I'm ill. So, of course, having a pandemic was a bit triggering to the OCD. I see you reacting.
No, because one of my best friends has OCD, and we were talking like maybe a couple weeks in. He had just taken a leave of absence from his work to go to a clinic to deal with his OCD.
Oh.
And then the pandemic hit. It was literally like right before the pandemic, and then it hit. And he's like, and it was so like, it was so triggering.
Yeah, I feel for him. Yeah, I had gotten really into a really good place with my OCD, with a nutritionist. I was working with a nutritionist in Houston from September through January because I've taken so many different approaches to this OCD issue that I've had my whole life that I was like, let's try an internal approach. And it was really working. And I was in a great place with it. And then the pandemic information, I started to read up on it a lot in about early February, and I was preparing to go on the road. And I'm like, okay, knowledge is power. I don't need to be afraid of this. And I was very well informed.
Yeah.
Before it became a lockdown situation in the U.S., I was like, okay, this isn't Mad Max. Like, we don't need to freak out. This is just, germs and a community shutdown that, like, our communities will shut down. We've never seen this before in our lifetime, but it's not that scary. But I still, I got triggered and I went pretty catatonic for a couple weeks at the beginning of this COVID thing. And now 91 days in, as you're saying, I'm in completely different mode. I'm in activism mode, which I've never been in before in my life. And I've been to 5 protests this week, and I've been covered in sweat and probably so many germs. And that's the strange thing about a mental illness is that, like, it can break your rationality sometimes. And right now my rationality is like, my physical body is not at risk right now. I just don't feel that way because there's this much more important and eminent thing that we are fighting. And I still, of course, am very aware of COVID and I'm being careful. And in Austin, I'm glad all the protesters were wearing masks that I could tell. But it's so strange to me that, 3 months ago, I couldn't hardly function because of the shock of a pandemic. And now the way my brain is rationalizing is like, actually, that's not as much of a risk as systemic racism is right now. And I don't mean to laugh about that. I'm just like, fuck my brain, really. Like,
yeah, but I mean, I think it's interesting that you have been able to, saying that how difficult it was once the pandemic hit, that you were able to kind of consciously work through the OCD to, go, I think it's a, I mean, let me ask this. When do you remember when you started to have these kind of like obsessive compulsive feelings, like when you were younger?
Yes, I do. I remember first having obsessive compulsive habits that were not at any way, like, they didn't disrupt my quality of life as a kid. They just made me look like a weird little kid. And I think a lot of kids have those idiosyncrasies, but one of them was playing paradiddles with my feet, which is something that like a percussionist or a tap dancer would know, but it's basically like a right, left, right, left, right, left, right, left, right, left, left, right. And it would be this like all day long constant pattern that I was doing simultaneously while living my life and not breaking. Another one was called triangles. I'm sure you've heard of it. No, I made it up in my head, so no one's ever heard of triangles. But have you ever seen a dog enter a new house and they like kind of walk the perimeter and smell everything?
Yes.
Well, basically triangles was my like age 6 through 9 years old, like sensory inspection. And I'd enter a new room and my hand, it was very subtle, but my hand would walk a perimeter and make triangles out of everything, like where two walls form a corner, I would have to complete the triangle with my hand by sweeping an invisible plane, and then I would need to like sometimes take the crown molding down from the floor to a triangle, and I would have to like triangle out some tables and cabinetry, and just like anywhere where there was definitely like a beautifully hard like triangle, I would definitely have to close up that triangle. And adults probably thought that I was just like being a weird child and touching everything in a room, but I knew what I was doing, and it was really important that I did it. Gave me a sense of like completion and satisfaction, and I'd feel unsettled if I couldn't do it. And then as I got older, sorry, you were going to ask something.
No, please keep going.
Once I think so, somewhere in my early childhood, like around age 9, I found out that my little sister was born with, my little sister was born with a chromosomal disorder called Turner syndrome.
Oh, yeah.
And my parents didn't disclose that to me until they thought I could understand. So I guess when I was about 9, my mom told me, but the way that she, and we've since discussed this, she's not going to like hear this podcast and be like, oh, the way that she told me was like, I thought I was in trouble because, I was kind of a troubled kid, and often my parents were having to have these kind of hard talks with me. So my mom one day after school was like, Sabrina, we need to talk. So my heart was racing and I was thinking I was in trouble. And we go up to my room and she closes the door and I can see she's having like a really hard time telling me what she's about to tell me. So I was scared the way that a kid is scared when they see vulnerability in their caretaker. So yeah, that's when my mom told me that my sister was born with this chromosomal disorder and that she wouldn't hit puberty and that she wouldn't grow past a certain height. And that they were going to, they were going to start giving her shots of human growth hormone so that they could see if she could, like, have a chance to have, like, a normal development. And I guess that is when the health thing manifested with me, because as a kid, my brain said, well, what's wrong with me that I don't know about? And I've never been able to drop that thought. And I'm healthy as an ox physically. But I always constantly just ruminating in my subconscious is this like, there's something terribly wrong with me that like somebody's going to sit down and tell me. And then it just got worse from there. Like my little sister ended up getting a brain tumor at an early age. She's survived. But I watched, my parents go through the vulnerability of, having a sick child that they couldn't protect her from these forces of nature. And I remember, being 13 and thinking, this should be me. This shouldn't be this little girl, and I'm sure that's what my parents were thinking too. If any of us could have just taken that for my sister, we would have. So in a way, I think that furthered this almost like fascination and fantasy of an obsession of like, well, what's wrong with me? And then when I was in my mid-20s, my dad got cancer, and I saw that look on my mom's face again when she had to sit me down and tell me something really awful that's like out of our control. So, privately, my OCD and what I think could possibly be wrong with me is getting worse and worse. And around that time, I started to think I had a heart condition, and I started to have these heart attacks. I have quotations going. They were just panic attacks, but I'd be rushed to the hospital, healthy, mid-20s. I remember 2 nurses sitting down and saying, honey, you need to take care of your mental health. You don't have anything wrong with your heart. I'm lucky I have an MD who's a close friend of mine, and as this OCD issue has gotten more like, just as I've had more awareness about it, I think like age 28 through 30, I spent a lot of money on health tests I didn't need, convinced I had different cancers, and this MD friend is really generous with me. Sometimes she'll meet me for lunch, but she'll like inspect me with her hands and tell me that like, I'm like, I have this lump on my throat. She's like, well, you sing every day. She's like, you're developing a different musculature. Like you have like you have like strong muscles in your throat, like around your neck. Like it's going to change as you get older. And then when I was in 2018, somebody really close to me, like one of my best friends who I actually used to be in a marriage with, got cancer like aggressively, and it took him in like 4 months. And I'm like, Sabrina, you're going to spiral out of control watching this keep happening to people. Like this is happening to someone. You need to have empathy for this person without manifesting this in yourself. But sure enough, I gave myself like all these psychosomatic symptoms right after he passed away. I totally thought I was dying, and I was grieving really hard. We just went into some of my really, you just Mark Maron'd me, my friend. You just got me into my like most personal stuff.
I mean, it really resonates with me. I mean, a lot of the stuff I constantly think about what we don't know about our own bodies, right? It's definitely something that like I'll wake up at 3 a.m. and go pee, and that's the first thoughts that flood into my head, right? Because our bodies specifically are these kind of like black boxes. We don't know what's going on. We have like little inklings of like we have these like clues, but that does, because like, I mean, a lot of people in my family die very young. Almost everyone in my family has had cancer at some point. My mom's had cancer 3 times. Like, it's just, most of my grandparents had died before I was born. It's been a preoccupation since I was a child. Yeah. But I think it's interesting, like all the stuff that you've talked about just resonates with me. But I wonder, you said really the trigger was like your mom sitting you down. I never had an experience like that. And I wonder because like I do a lot of like rhythmic tapping. I do a lot of like this kind of stuff of like imagining shapes and things like that in the architecture of whatever. Wow. And it never became compulsive for me. And I wonder, you're also beyond that, beyond just like having the kind of like precursors that eventually led to having OCD for you. You're also dealing with a lot of heavy shit when you're a kid.
Yeah. Yeah. I've done a lot of reading about trauma over, I think I've been really serious about exploring my psyche and about, shaping my mental health to have a more comfortable life. I've been really serious about that for about 6 years. And in one of the books I've read about PTSD, and this is basically PTSD in relation to like the way we manifest physical illness. I read something where the psychologist had written a traumatic experience. Trauma is the experience of not believing you will survive, of being in a situation and not seeing your survival while you're in that situation. So I think, when my mom, like you and I both have these like inklings of OCD and of stuff, but when my mom sat me down and said, there's something that your sister was born with and you're just now hearing about it, and this is the reality of like how a life can work or how a body can work. I do think it traumatized me, and I don't mean that in like I'm pointing a finger at my family. I just mean like it shocked me to understand the world in that scope and to realize there was no control. It was basically like this acknowledgement as a 9-year-old. There are things I cannot control. There are things my mom and dad cannot control. And my psyche was really fragile with that idea, and it broke me. And so, yes, the level of OCD I have is out of when I feel a lack of control. Yeah, it's me trying to control what little I can.
Oh God, yeah, yeah. Like I don't think I learned the lesson of like what's actually in my control until a couple years ago into my 30s, and I'm like, oh wait, I don't have control over anything. But like I was already an adult by then and could kind of handle that lesson. Whereas like as a child, to have that realization is shattering, right? It shatters your knowledge of the world when at a point where like I think a lot of other people have like you usually don't have you don't start to shatter your worldview until your teens, right? Mm-hmm. And then it's always just like it's usually very gradual. Mm-hmm. But you, in this moment, it all kind of like fell apart, right?
I would say so. Yeah, it shattered my worldview, and it at the same time gave me like this really quick lesson and education of like how mortal, like my mortality. Like I came face to face with my mortality at the age 9. And I say this acknowledging that trauma is in such a wide spectrum of the possibilities of what can happen to a person in their childhood or in their adulthood. And it's the more I've read about trauma, a person, like I feel like I was a fragile person and that was enough to break me, and that some people have to go through much worse than what I saw as a kid. And some people, some people are resilient to even more extremes. But yeah, some people have their world shattered as a child or as an adult in violent ways. And I'm very lucky. I was always protected as a child and well taken care of. I do feel very fortunate. So when I do speak about trauma, I just feel like it's important to acknowledge that, like, we pretty much, most of us have it, and it's mostly from childhood. But there is a certain, like, scope. Like, I'm very lucky to never have experienced certain things in my childhood that some people don't even get a childhood because of. So if anybody is listening to this and feels triggered hearing about trauma and stuff, I just, I hope that they can feel like the empathy that I have for like the range of experiences that people can be subjected to.
And I can also, tell me how accurate this is. I can also kind of see how some of the stuff that led into you kind of putting up these like walls.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Yeah, definitely. You start to, like in an animalistic way, you're like, I must be protected. I must be on guard and defensive. And you don't notice how that's manifesting into your personality until your late 20s.
Yeah. Oh, exactly. I mean, again, my experience is like a very thin version of your experience, but like it's the same mechanics that worked in my own psychology are like, I can see how it works, how it worked for you. Right. Mm-hmm. And then you put up it's not conscious. You don't know you're putting up these walls, right? They just go up, and you just kind of like your experience of the world is kind of dulled. And then eventually, like at some point you not everyone does, but like you become conscious of like, oh, this is the dynamic. This is what I've been doing. And then, my therapy has been, how do I, cause these are all physical metaphors, right? It's just like, all right, I quote unquote built walls. What does that mean? What does that actually mean in terms of like, how do I understand my emotions now? And how do I like, Mr. Gorbachev tear down these walls to my own emotions, right? To feel the world, to once again understand your emotions in the moment, as opposed to like understand it. You're like, oh, I was angry. And then 2 years later, you're like, oh, I get why I was angry.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah. I feel like some of our, like our American mentality of like strength and being self-made and stuff is very damaging to our ability to truly understand ourselves and our minds and our emotions. And that, a more socialist country also I find usually has more like mental health help options available to their general population, and they're not shamed about it. They're like therapy is for healthy people too. Therapy is for healthy people too. They're like, because it's important and healthy to understand yourself. One more thing I want to say about PTSD, in case anyone listening to this is like, wait, this applies to me. What did you read? To what helped you break through? One of the most important texts I've read about PTSD, and it's about understanding PTSD from a neurological standpoint, and it is also a very fascinating research about how trauma relates to physical illness. And it's called The Body Keeps the Score. The Body Keeps the Score. I can't recommend it enough. A friend of mine recommended it to me for like 3 years before I read it. And then I read it, and it was life-changing. I've sent it to many people. The psychologist who wrote it is named Bessel van der Kolk. And he's like, I don't want to misspeak, but I believe he's Dutch American. And he is a really unique psychologist because his studies on trauma were happening in the mid-90s when neurological like brain scanning was becoming more affordable. So he was able to like team up with neurologists and really, really like see the physical parts of our brain, the way that trauma can affect our brain. And something that made me break down and cry was actually seeing like a brain scan that showed like a traumatized person's brain activity in this one region of their brain. The activity was completely stagnated, and that was the same part of the brain that shorts out if you have a stroke. Like that is how physical trauma is. To like people think that it's psychological, and it is, but our brain is part of our body. Hello. So
well, I mean, it's you grow up in Western civilization. the mind-body duality, the idea that like they're completely separate, is so ingrained, kind of like in the way we conceive of ourselves, and it only, as an adult, did I ever like realize like, oh no, they're not separate. It's all one kind of thing, and they're all connected, and you're living off of like a conceptual scheme that Descartes came up with, or, modern philosophers came up with like 400 years ago. And it's a terrible, there's a philosopher, Daniel Dennett, I think is his name. And I read a book of his back in grad school where he talked about like, even our experience of the world, you think it's like this complete experience. It pops up in a bunch of different parts of the brain. Like the experience we're having right now, there's no movie theater in our brains that is like showing this in our heads, right? It's a bunch of different neurons in a bunch of different parts of our brains all like sparking at once. Mm-hmm. And that's an altogether, that complexity and our physical being in the world is who we are, and how we experience or how we go through the world.
I think we need to like rewrite that nursery school jingle that they learn, and it should be like the head bone's connected to the neck bone, the neck bone's connected to the fear bone's connected to the sad bone's connected to the angry bone's connected to the heart bone. There's a plug for one of my bands.
Please make that song.
I'm working on it like right now. If you're wondering what I've been working on throughout COVID, you've given me the most inspiration that I've had. You've been my muse.
Thank you. Actually, okay, so we're getting towards the end of the show, and I do have I am curious then, where, through dealing with all, family issues and personal, psychological and PTSD, where does music come in? Where does creativity come in? Is this something that's like parallel to your experience? Is it something that you develop an interest in making things as a response to some of these issues that you're dealing with?
Oh, absolutely.
A third thing?
So just in like the recent past, like I can like really quickly throw out little quotes of like my song lyrics that are directly related to my OCD and my health OCD. Like in Heartbones, we have a song called Little Dancer, and I'm like, when I get depressed, can't keep my mind off shit like cancer, I'll command you to undress and tell me I'm your little dancer. Sweet Spirit has a new album out, and there's a B-side song called Only Love. And what that song is actually about is like the way that my constant belief that I'm dying, the way that it affects my relationships, my intimate relationships, and causes them to almost be over before they begin. And then the pre-chorus of that song is, I tell you to trust love, you tell me you're trying, possessed by the thought of one of us dying. And like, so it's very always constantly there, like quite literally. There's a Giant Dog song called Too Much Makeup that's about the moment that like you're laying in your grave with like too much makeup on. And the hook is like, or the first lines are, all the sorrows, all the heroes, all the failures come to pasture when you die. But mainly the song is us screaming, when you die, when you die, when you die, when you die. So it's always there. But the way that I started with music, and the way that maybe that relates to like my mental health makeup is like, yeah, of course, when people make the decision to be an artist, or when they inherently become an artist, it's because it does parallel, I think, their emotional experience with the world, or or their psychological experience with the world. So for me, it was like, I think I started writing songs in my early 20s. I wasn't a songwriter before that. I was into theater and performance art. I was writing little plays. One of them was about a government that gives everyone cancer through the water supply.
Oh.
And there was like a suppository scene that my parents had to watch happen in my like sophomore year thesis at college. That's as far as I got in college, but I was like, suppositories, done. I'm out. That's all I
Performed
needed.
You're like, mic drop. Yeah.
Yeah, live suppository.
Like, I've already put something in my butt on stage. We're done here.
No, someone else did.
Oh.
Put it in my butt.
There's already been a scene of things being inserted in rectums on stage.
On stage.
Mic drop.
Mic drop. Yeah. And
Where else can I go?
So I ended up in Austin. I was, I'll disclose because I've made this public info before. I was doing drugs in New York. I was young. I was overwhelmed by the city, and I just got into the craziest stuff I could possibly get into at the time, and that was also formative. And I ended up in Austin like, well, this is where all my high school friends came, the good ones, you know, like after we got out of high school, there's a bunch of couches I can crash on here, and I couch hopped for like 3 months till I had a job, and like, you know, my mom helped me get an apartment, which was super cool of her. And I started to kind of recover here, and I didn't think, oh, I'm going to start a band, but I had an acoustic guitar. I started writing songs to kind of process my depression, really, with like my early 20s, just like, I'm rejected and I'm depressed and I'm, you know, on the fringe of society, and I'm also a queer person that doesn't even know where my queer expression belongs, and like, even what kind am I, like, so it was just like all of that. And I was writing songs, and then I've just remained like so close with my high school buddies, like, for better or worse. It's been unhealthy at times, but it's also a really beautiful and valuable thing that I treasure. And one high school buddy gave another high school buddy a cassette tape of like living room recordings I'd made. And that high school buddy was Andrew Cashin, who's now like been my songwriting partner in A Giant Dog and Sweet Spirit for like over a decade. Andrew had a real job in Houston and then a girlfriend in Austin, and was going back and forth. So he and I were riding up the storm, and we were going to shows in Austin. Like, we were seeing the OCs come through on this tour where they toured through like 3 times in 1 year with Ty Segall as their opener. Ty Segall was a college student and a one-man band at the time, and we just had so much admiration for all these musicians and their scene, and we were trying to figure ourselves out. And yeah, we started with A Giant Dog, and it was just kind of goofy, like rockabilly meets punk, lots of angst and kink and aggression. And I've always looked at music as like, wow, I would not have lived through my 20s without this, without a place to be where people said, hey, you're all right. Like, who you are, you're pretty weird, but it fits here. And of course there was opposition as well to what we were doing, but you know, you very slowly build your scene, and the 30 people in the room are there because they think you're all right or not that weird, or they want to see you exhibit your weirdness. So I really needed that, and I needed songwriting, and I needed performance, and I still do need those things, but I think it went from being my outlet in my early 20s to somewhere in my late 20s being a real career. And that is when some things went real haywire with my mental health, because when you mix your saving grace with also your like self-worth, that can become really complicated and we're still working on that, I say, as I point to myself. We're still working on it. But, yeah, you just have to step back sometimes and reevaluate why you're doing this and that you're even doing it, you know?
Yeah, I get exactly where you're coming from. Moving out to Los Angeles, I think was, you know, it went from being, even though we had like, both Naomi and I had success when we lived in New York, it was still, you know, and when we moved out here, it became a career. And so it went from a passion to an actual like, oh, you know, we buy cat food with this now.
Yeah.
And I think it's a real mind fuck.
Yeah.
That transition. Did you go to Tisch?
I did, yeah. I went to a school in Tisch called the Experimental Theater Wing. And I don't think I honestly even knew what experimental theater was before I was in that program. And that program was certainly formative to who I am as a performer and to my like ability to express myself, because I'm sure when I entered the program, what my professors saw was this locked up little like scared, very tightly wound, locked up, guarded person who was very afraid of themselves. That's what describes me when I entered experimental theater. And throughout the program, which for me was 2 years, it would have been 3 years if I had stayed, but I was pulled aside pretty frequently by professors who were like, we're not sure this is registering for you. Like, I don't know how familiar you are with musical theater. Do you know a chorus line at all?
A little bit.
I don't judge you. There's just like this character in a chorus line, and she's supposed to be like a Puerto Rican American girl who had like been shamed by her drama teachers because she's like, they like tell her like, imagine an ice cream. Now be the ice cream. And she's like, I felt nothing. They called me nothing. And like, that was me in that program. I'm like, I'm doing it. No, I'm doing it just like everyone else. And they're like, no, you're not really doing it. And yet it was still formative because it took me, I'm just kind of a slow bloomer. And it took me a few years after leaving that program and then like leaving that program, entering punk rock performance and really unleashing on stage. I was like, oh, I'm using everything I learned. I was just still too inhibited at the time to really express what I was learning. And it just took a few years of it like sitting in my muscle memory, and it really has come out on stage. I've definitely had fantasies of like, I know that my professors in New York wouldn't be at the clubs I play in New York, but I've definitely had fantasies of like, oh, I wish Mr. Knickerbocker were here, or like, I wish that Raina were here, or Rosemary. Like, I wish that KJ, I wish they could see me now. They would be so proud that like they really did get through to me. They didn't think they did, but they did. Catherine Corey.
Okay. So wait, so this I've had this. I wrote this question down early on, and I wanted to ask it before we ended. Through this process of like opening up and becoming vulnerable, how do you think your creativity has changed, or how do you think your approach towards writing songs or being a performer has changed?
Wow, that's a big, huge question. I think that, like, if someone were to be nerdy enough to listen through my discography for some reason, like 10 years from now, like if I'm dead and it's important to do that, I think the record on which people will hear true vulnerability in my lyricism will be actually the record. What's crazy is like I have trouble remembering which songs are on which records, but it would be the record Toy by A Giant Dog, which is actually our fourth record, so pretty late on in my musical career. Like what you'll hear before that is somebody trying to repress their vulnerability, and then on the record Toy is when I start to blatantly say things that I fear, or things that I feel, or things that I am. And it's also important to acknowledge that I have a writing collaborator in A Giant Dog, which is Andrew. On Toy, he really wrote the music and like let me run wild with the lyrics on it. And I started to say things that, like, maybe the things that I wanted to say before I couldn't even get past my bandwidth. Like, I'm not saying that they would have told me not to say it. They might have. Mm-hmm. But also, like I said, that masculine fear of like being rejected or shamed or laughed at. I was speaking in metaphors all the time, and then on Toy is when I'm blatantly saying like, I'm losing my mind. I've thought about killing myself. Actually, I don't condone that. Let's all not do that. But like really saying it. And then in my writing process with Sean Tillman in Minneapolis for Heartbones, it was so different than writing with people that I grew up with and who I wanted to see me a certain way. Because with Sean, he and I are so similar that from the beginning of our friendship, there was an expression of vulnerability. And then from the beginning of our collaboration, which happened about a year and a half or 2 years into our friendship, our collaboration was so directly, it was such a direct product of our friendship and of our conversations, because he and I were being such an open book with each other, that we would have these like really deep conversations that were almost therapeutic. And then we would use some of what we had said as our lyrics writing, which is a really revealing and vulnerable thing to do, but we felt safe doing that. So if anyone listens to the Heartbones album, yeah, some of the lyrics are really literal because they come from conversations that we were having at a kitchen table, like where we're sitting right now with you. And we were like saying, yeah, I felt that too. Or like, hey, I've been through this, man, and this is okay. Or like, oh, I hate that. I fucking hate that about myself too. Like, I'm awful when I'm that, you know? So that was the process there. And then the most vulnerable though, the most vulnerable that anyone can ever hear me will be on some music that I haven't ever recorded or published, but I do have a solo body of work. And the reason those are solo works is because they're either things that I wouldn't put my band through. Like, I don't need you to get behind me on this really explicit song about me making love to a lover that I am writing like explicitly about, or I don't need you to get behind me on this song about how I completely reject a conventional female role in the household. That's actually just my voice that I want. Or like maybe some of the songs are too important and intimate to me. Like one of them is a song I call Spider Song, and it's about how I feel about having to come out to people close to me, like come out to a partner about my queerness and my gender identity, or how to come out to my family. You know, this is a whole other conversation, but like the same vulnerability I feel in coming out about my queerness and gender is the same vulnerability it takes when I'm in an intimate partnership to say to my partner, I have bipolar and I have OCD, and here's ways that you might, you know, here's some challenges about me. Like, these things are all so close to my identity and to my heart that, like, I don't know if other queer people feel this way, but they feel like very similar, like, personal things to have to disclose and to worry about being rejected for. So that's what that song's about. So where those songs live is actually just in live settings. I've played those songs live with local Austin musicians in order to like keep my income up when my bands aren't working. And then now people can see me perform those songs sometimes on a live stream that I do, which I'm taking a break from right now, so that like myself and like the people in my realm can focus on more important social issues at hand. But like I really these live streams are some of the first places I've like been able to like get through those songs in their entirety without crying or shaking. And I think, you know, as a service to myself, I do eventually need to record and those songs and have them live in a place other than just coming out live out of my mouth.
Yeah. So it's really been like, as you've opened up as a person, it's flooded, who you are has flooded into the songs you write.
Absolutely. Yes. I'm that kind of writer. And I'd say a lot of, you know, you're either that kind of writer or you're not. Some people can express themselves more comfortably in metaphorical terms or in like the negative of what they are, like the denial or the opposite imprint, or by singing others, like stories of others. Me, I relate best by saying, well, this is the freak I am, and take it or leave it. And if you empathize, I see you and you see me. And, you know, I'm here for that handful of people.
Sabrina, thank you so much for being on the show. This was just, it was wonderful to talk to you. I love the new album so much. I listen to it once a day. So I was really glad that we got to talk.
Thank you so much, Andrew. Yeah, thanks for having me.
Of course. And we'll see you guys next time. Bye.
Bye, oh, bye, oh, bye, oh, bye, oh, bye, oh, bye, oh, bye.